I'm Terry Granados, Education Program Director for the Sexual Assault Response Center. We provide support and services to victims of all non-domestic violence crimes through advocacy, crisis intervention, and counseling. SARC has a 24-hour crisis line that is available for survivors and their non-offending family members and friends anytime you need someone to listen. SARC also has education programs that strive to positively impact our community through awareness and information in the prevention of sexual assault. Our program today will talk about the factors that affect sexual assault and youth violence in our community. We'll also discuss how SARC and other members in our community are working with youth services to lower incidences of violence. Our guests today are Andrea Ray, child and family therapist with Sunderland Family Treatment Services, Heather Cooper, mental health counselor for Benton and Franklin County's Juvenile Justice Center, Dottie Stevens, assistant director with the Kennewick School District, and Dave Reardon, crime analyst at the Pasco Police Department. Welcome, and thank you for being on the program. Unfortunately, sexual abuse is considered to be a relatively common experience in the lives of children. A report released by the National Institute of Justice revealed that out of the 22.3 million children between the ages of 12 and 17 years in the United States, 1.8 million were victims of serious sexual assault or abuse. According to the Encyclopedia of Crime and Punishment, children are approximately 3 times more likely than adults to be victims of rape. As startling as those statistics may be, my guests are on the panel are far more familiar with them. Andrea, in your work with children under the age of 12, is sexual assault a factor in whether or not a child will act out or resort to violence in an effort to cope, and at what level?
Absolutely a factor. Children are pretty vulnerable during those ages of 0 to 12 due to their emotional development. Erik Erikson is very helpful in looking at that because he talks about emotional development in terms of trust versus mistrust, shame versus having autonomy, and also initiative versus guilt. So when you look at if trauma occurs during that time, it can delay that emotional development, which in turn will cause children to internalize doubt, have problems with self-esteem, have issues with all kinds of relations to the outside world. So it could definitely relate to their acting out in violence or acting out to get attention or find a place to fit in. So anytime between 0 and 12, it's pretty imperative that children, if they do incur any kind of trauma or experience that it's talked about and they're able to be in a safe place where they can process it, or they do run the risk of internalizing it and therefore acting out later as they grow up.
So Erik Erikson's model is the one you use?
I do look at that one a lot because he's very helpful in talking about some pretty core emotional development that we go through, which is, like I said, in 0 to 12 years old, it's trust versus mistrust. So an infant learns whether or not they can trust the world or if they are going to be harmed by the world, which is pretty significant if you look at later on their development and whether or not they will act out against the world. So if they can't figure that out early on, how to trust, then it's pretty likely that they will act out or become violent against others. It's potential for them to do that. Same with autonomy versus self-doubt. If they find out that they can't do things on their own in the toddler stage, 3 to 5, or they incur trauma during that time, then they're likely to experience, low self-esteem and other problems because they can't figure out how to do things on their own, or they're told that they're not doing it correctly. So if you think about that in relation to others, they can definitely have a lot of anger and resentment about that in that early childhood development, emotional development. As they get a little bit older, more like the school-age child, 8 to 11 years old, or 5 to 11 years old, you're looking at initiative versus guilt. So they're learning how to do things on their own, and if they learn that they can't, again, if they have some kind of trauma or event that happens during that time, then again you can look at they internalize that and then they end up acting out potentially and becoming violent.
At what age do you see symptoms of depression, low self-esteem, and the behaviors of running away, Andrea?
Depression can occur very early in a child's life, meaning usually I don't see it any earlier than 3 to 5, mostly because children don't exhibit those types of, they don't internalize depression until they're approaching more of that, like I said with Erickson, that initiative versus guilt, or autonomy versus shamed out. So they don't really start manifesting self-esteem issues, which is a symptom of depression, until they've reached that emotional development stage. So that would mean more like a toddler would start showing, like 3 to 5 would start showing signs of depression, which can be disruptive behaviors. Actually, more likely you're going to see it that way versus just kind of sad or tearful. You're going to see it more as acting out, which can progress into, as they get into school age, it can progress into acting out behaviors, increasing disruptive behaviors and potentially violence or acting out with others. And as far as running away, that definitely can occur in an early age. Typically, I don't see it any earlier than 8, which people might think, that's pretty early actually for a child to start running away, but it looks more like trying to solve a problem, like they have a conflict at home and they're running away to a friend's house, or they're running away to the park down the street. So it's not the running away that we might think of as an older teen might do, which is maybe more of a long-term solution to a problem, where they might leave or go take a bus somewhere, or try to actually hide out for a period of time. Younger children aren't typically doing that type of running away. They're doing it more as a short-term, and families usually find them, or they usually return pretty quickly. But running away can definitely start occurring at a very early age, depending on what's happening at home, depending on what they're experiencing.
Heather is the mental health counselor at the Benton Franklin County's Juvenile Justice Center. Heather, give us some statistical data on youth offenders in our community.
Well, since 2004, our court has had 41 youthful sexual offenders adjudicated. What we do know is that these youth are very treatable once the offense has been reported, and in our counties we have a recidivism rate of less than 3%.
Excellent. You told me that the female population was especially challenging because they are at higher risk of sexual assault. Why is that, Heather?
Well, I would first say that no one ever deserves to be sexually assaulted. However, what we find with our high-risk female population is that they are engaging in behaviors that make them more vulnerable, such as running away, using drugs and alcohol, hanging around adults, going into vehicles, spending the night with people that they don't know, and they find themselves in situations where they're not able to keep themselves safe.
I see. Is there education programs that are offered to reduce their risk in that?
As far as sexual assault and keeping themselves safe, yeah, we do work with kids on skills and social skills to work on keeping themselves safe. What we find a lot of times with our female population is they've been sexually abused as children before adolescence, and that seems to be the root cause of a variety of problems, such as running away, school failure, family conflict, significant substance abuse, serious mental health concerns, self-injurious behavior, and suicide attempts.
Wow. Do you get a lot of disclosures?
Yes, unfortunately I do. While youth are in detention, I do receive a lot of sexual assault disclosures for the first time. Youth in detention are generally between the ages of 11 and 18, and far more numbers of females are making those disclosures than males. And so what we do in detention to support them is of course, support them, believe them, assist them in making that report. We involve Children's Administration, law enforcement, and then also working with their families to talk about what's happened.
What impact does sexual violence have on these children?
Particularly with our female population, like I said,
Right.
They're not keeping themselves safe, and using drugs and doing other things to make themselves feel better, and engaging in such high-risk behavior.
Wow. Dottie, what is your position at the Kennewick School District?
I'm an assistant director for alternative education and support services in the Kennewick schools.
Excellent. What are the challenges you face with the youth that come into the program that have been sexually abused?
Well, as Heather was saying, it's not just the sexual abuse, but there's also co-occurring. So there may also be drug-related issues, violence issues that lead to school failure, frequent lack of attendance, school failure. And so the student will challenge us to more personalize their education, have to have a better relationship with them through some outside counseling as well as school counseling, perhaps some special education, and other ways, sometimes alternative education, a more personalized setting for them, because without that relationship building, they're not going to be successful in school.
Okay, great. Dottie, what are some of the easy fixes in the school district that can help these children?
Well, I don't know if there are any easy fixes. Of course, the best thing is to have boundaries for children and for parents to know who that child is with all the time. And so even if it is after the fact, start setting those boundaries and doing it. In the schools with No Child Left Behind, every child is important to us, and we're looking continually to work on our rigor, our relevance, and our relationship with all children. And that's how we find they're going to be successful. This means we don't have any invisible children. We know who they are, they're connected to someone, they're connected to adults. We are using new programs for children. In the high school, we're using a Navigation 101 that sets up mentorship that the child will have, the young adult will have for 4 years with a teacher with about 18, 20 students. We'll know them for the full 4 years and be tracking things like their attendance and their progress, as well as they're going to deliver a curriculum to them that's exciting for the students. It has components of career education for them in there so that they see again, a reason and a relevance for their education. And we're also doing Link Crew, which is a mentorship with older students and younger students, again, cutting back on that invisibility. So every child counts. They are successful in school, and they can be successful in life.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, Dave Reardon is a crime analyst at the Pasco Police Department. He specializes in gangs and gang violence in our community. We know that there is a high rate of alcohol and drug abuse in gangs and gang-related activities, especially in relation to sexual assault. Dave, most gang members are over the age of 19, as you stated in our interview.
Yes.
But recruitment of new gang members starts when, and what is the draw for new members?
Gang members are recruited usually in middle school and high school, although they are recruited down to probably 5th and 6th grade. We're seeing recruitment as young, and they begin being groomed even earlier than that by their friends, their family members, extended family. The draw is some of the basic needs. They want acceptance. They want protection. They feel like they're afraid, and also there's a glamour, kind of like the Jesse James kind of a syndrome, that there's a glamour to gang members. They don't see gang members for what they are. It's a self-destructive lifestyle. They see gang members in a glamorous sense, and if they become a gang member, then they have the self-acceptance. And so a lot of these people are socially marginal anyway, so the acceptance is a big factor.
Dave, when you were commenting on children or school-age children trying to find a place to belong, it really made me think of how important it is in this early emotional development that I was referring to, that they do find that, and a lot of that occurs anywhere between 5 and 8 years old, even earlier than you were talking about. And so if they don't find that sense of belonging then that's what we often see, is that they get involved with that gang activity that you were describing.
Sometimes they don't get the parents are absent in one way or the other. Either they're working or a single parent. It could be either one, not necessarily a single parent, but so a lot of times we'll see runaway behavior, and there's an attraction of the sexual side. There's females involved with the gang, so there's a sexual attraction. There's also drugs available, alcohol available. It's kind of a glamorous lifestyle, at least for a time, and they get the respect they feel that they need. So those are some of the things.
What would discourage children from involving themselves in the rape initiation that all too often happens?
Well, rape initiation, a formal rape initiation, at least in this area. Now, in other areas, there has been rape initiation. In this area, we haven't seen the formal rape initiations. It's more of, they're more accepted because they consent to being sexually assaulted by the gang members. What we're seeing is usually an alcohol or drug party, followed by a date rape or multiple partners. And sometimes the girl doesn't even remember what happened. Sometimes the drugs are put in the drinks of the girl. It's kind of, and the girls that usually attend the parties are kind of socially marginal to start out with. They're a lot of times they're runaways and things like this, and so they want the acceptance of these boys, and so they begin to drink. And the alcohol factor is very dangerous, and it's kind of a slippery slope because then they don't have the judgment they need to fend off an attacker, for instance, or somebody that wants to have sex with them. And after that, then they become more accepted in the gang. And following that, a lot of times you'll see the girls being jumped in the traditional way, which is being beat up for a certain amount of seconds. So the typical way of being initiated is being jumped in, but the acceptance many times does come through the sex that happens at like a gang party.
What are the date rape drugs that are common in that form of party?
I'm sorry, the date rape drugs?
The date rape drugs that they use, other than alcohol, which is the most common one.
We have seen cocaine, occasionally ketamine, but typically it would be cocaine, methamphetamine, just your typical drugs. It's not. They usually take the drugs along with the alcohol. We're not in past years we saw more of the unusual drugs being slipped in. We're not seeing that so much anymore. Now it's the typical drugs being used along with the alcohol.
What would dissuade a child from becoming a gang member?
Well, I think most kids don't become gang members, and that's because they have an internal moral ability to see what will happen, the consequences, if they follow this self-destructive lifestyle. If they want to attain their goals, they realize that to follow a self-destructive lifestyle is not going to help them do that. And so they understand, well, for instance, seeing that most gang members commit crimes on a continual basis and felonies. Therefore, eventually they go to prison. They take drugs. They get many of them are addicted to drugs. They do alcohol all the time. Those are all self-destructive patterns. And if a individual wants to attain their goals, that's going to destroy their own goals by doing those things. I think that understanding that is a way to stay out of a gang. The glamour, of course, is the attraction. The glamour of the gangs is the attraction. It's a self-deception that a gang member has, that he will never get caught, that he will never go to prison, that this is all going to be fun and games, but eventually it catches up with him and it destroys his entire life. And so I think a kid understanding that it's a self-destructive, immoral, criminal lifestyle, that keeps them from joining gangs.
I see. Excellent. Andrea, back to you. What are some of the techniques and the methods that you use for children in your practice that would help get them through the sexual assault, the self-defeating behaviors that you talked about earlier?
Mm-hmm. One of the approaches that I've been trained in that's very effective with children who've experienced trauma is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. One of the things that addresses is both the process of expressing what's happened to the child and also dealing with a lot of the additional emotions and disruptive behaviors that can occur as symptoms of the trauma and their internalization of that. Typically, that therapy is used for children who are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and are exhibiting difficulty expressing a range of emotions, and also have thoughts that lead to some very unhelpful behaviors and behaviors with the world too, and like behaviors with others and behaviors in school and other things like that. So TFCBT is kind of the shorter version of that. Trauma focused is a evidence-based practice, and it's very effective. It's actually a very brief process. It's only about 10 to 12 sessions, and the parents are always involved in that process. And they also learn along with the child, get educated on how to help the child express different emotions, and how to also teach them parenting skills on how to address some of the disruptive behaviors that you start seeing at an early age, and hopefully get them on track so that they can navigate the world better and not go to where we don't want them to, which is acting out in violence or internalizing a lot of that distress. So it helps them express it.
Well, I'd like to thank Andrea, Heather, Dottie, and Dave for their time and input for this program. We always want to take the time to acknowledge victims and survivors out there who may be watching. We know that a show like this can sometimes bring up different emotions and responses, so please call the Sexual Assault Response Center if we can be of any assistance, or if you need more information about our services. Our phone number is available 24 hours a day at 509-374-5391 or 1-888-846-RAPE. I'm Terry Granados with the Sexual Assault Response Center. Thank you for watching.